All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Sometimes in business it feels like you're on this amazing winning streak. You land a big client, you send off the invoice, and then...
Crickets.
Exactly. Total radio silence. And it turns out your customer's business has hit a major snag.
Brr.
They've gone into administration.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. It was right. And today we're going to tackle this beast head on. We'll break down exactly what administration means for you as the supplier or vendor. And most importantly, how to navigate this situation and come out on top. To help us untangle this web, we have an administration expert in the house. Someone who can give us some real-world insights. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So let's jump right in administration. Can you give us the elevator pitch?
Yeah.
What exactly does it mean for a customer to go into administration?
Sure. So in a nutshell, administration happens when a company is facing some serious financial trouble. They're struggling to pay their debts. They might be on the verge of insolvency.
So that's is that like bankruptcy?
Well, it's not quite the same thing, but it's definitely in the same ballpark. Insolvency basically means a company can't pay its debts when they're due. So administration is like a sort of a last-ditch effort to try and rescue the company.
Okay, so it's not game over just yet, but it's definitely a timeout. So what happens during this timeout? Who are these administrators that swoop in?
Good question. So the administrators are like specialized professionals, often from accounting or legal backgrounds. And they're appointed by the court or sometimes by the company itself. And their job is to basically assess the situation, figure out what went wrong, and see if there's any way to turn things around.
So they're like the company doctors trying to diagnose the problem and come up with a treatment plan.
I like that analogy. Yeah, they're trying to stabilize the patient, stop the bleeding, so to speak, and then explore options for recovery.
Got it. So they're not necessarily there to dismantle the company, but to try and save it, if possible.
Exactly. They're looking for the best outcome for everyone involved, the company itself, its creditors, and even its employees.
Okay, so let's say our listener finds themselves in this situation. They get the dreaded news that one of their customers has entered administration. What should they do first? We've got this great article outlining 8 key steps.
Oh, yeah, that's a great resource. It's a roadmap for anyone facing this challenge.
But I imagine it can feel pretty overwhelming. Where do you even begin?
You're right. It can be a lot to process. But the most important thing is, don't panic.
Easier said than done, right? Especially when you're potentially staring at some serious losses.
I hear you. But panicking isn't going to help anyone. Take a deep breath. Gather all the information you can about the specific type of administration your customer is under, because that will shape your response.
Okay, knowledge is power, as they say. So information first. Don't just hit the panic button.
Exactly. Now, the article really emphasizes communication as a crucial first step, particularly reaching out to the administrators.
So like picking up the phone and saying, hey, what's going on?
Exactly.
Okay.
You want to establish contact as soon as possible, introduce yourself, and let them know you're a creditor.
Because I imagine they're dealing with a ton of creditors all vying for attention.
Absolutely. So being proactive and getting on their radar early on is key.
So we've contacted the administrators. What's next?
Well, the next step might seem a little obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people skip over it. Figure out how much the company owes you.
Okay. So gather all your invoices, statements, any documentation that proves the debt.
Exactly. You need to have your ducks in a row when it comes to substantiating your claim.
So you're saying don't just rely on memory.
Yeah.
Get those records in order.
Absolutely. And once you've done that, it's time for step number 3, which is to carefully review your contract with the customer.
Okay. Now we're getting to the nitty-gritty. I bet a lot of people dread dealing with contracts, but I have a feeling this is where things get interesting.
Contracts can be a bit dry, but they're like gold in a situation like this. You're looking for any clauses that specifically address insolvency or administration. These clauses can be real lifesavers. They might outline things like, you know how to file a claim for your outstanding payments?
Wow.
Or even if you have the right to just terminate the contract altogether.
So it's like a roadmap for this whole insolvency thing.
Exactly. And some contracts even have these things called provisions for like debt subordination, which can impact how your claim is treated compared to other creditors. It gets a bit complicated.
Debt subordination. Okay, that's a new one for me.
Yeah, it's basically like a pecking order for who gets paid first if the company's assets are liquidated. But the main takeaway here is don't just shove that contract in a drawer. Dust it off. Give it a good read. It might have some valuable nuggets in there.
Yeah, contracts are definitely having a moment in the spotlight.
Yeah.
So we've talked to the administrators, we figured out what we're owed,
Yeah.
and we've scoured our contract. What's the next move?
All right. So step number 5 is a big one. You need to register as a creditor. officially.
Okay. So it's
Yeah.
like raising your hand in class and saying, hey, I'm part of this mess too.
Yeah, pretty much. It's basically formally notifying the administrators that the company owes you money.
And why is that so important? Wouldn't they already know that from, contacting them?
Well, officially registering as a creditor gives you a voice in the process. You become part of the creditors committee.
Oh, so it's not just about sitting on the sidelines and waiting to see what happens.
Not at all. This committee has some real power. They can actually influence the decision-making during the administration process.
Okay. So it's like joining forces with the other creditors to try and get the best possible outcome for everyone.
Exactly. You're all in the same boat, and working together can increase your chances of recovering at least a portion of what you're owed.
Okay. Starting to feel a bit more empowered now. But I imagine there's more to consider, right?
You bet. So far, we've talked about the immediate steps to take, but there's also the bigger picture to consider. Like, what are your legal options?
Okay. Yeah. The article mentions that, but it doesn't really go into detail. What are we talking about here?
So there are a couple of avenues you could explore. One is debt recovery. This involves using professional debt collection agencies or even taking legal action to try and recoup the money owed to you.
So basically bringing in the big guns to help you get what you're rightfully owed.
Exactly. They have the experience and resources to navigate the legal complexities and chase down those payments more effectively.
Okay. Makes sense. What's the other option?
The other route is taking direct legal action against the company itself. This could involve filing a lawsuit to force payment or even try to secure your claim on some of the company's assets.
That sounds a bit more aggressive, I guess.
It can be, and it's definitely not something to jump into lightly. Legal action can be expensive and time-consuming. You really need to weigh the potential benefits against the costs and risks involved.
So it's not a decision to be made on a whim.
Exactly. And that's why having a good lawyer on your side is invaluable. They can help you assess your options and figure out the best course of action.
Okay, so we've got debt recovery and direct legal action. What if neither of those options seem appealing or feasible?
Well, there might be other more creative solutions out there. A lawyer could advise you to maybe negotiate a settlement with the administrators or explore something called a company voluntary arrangement.
A company what now?
A company voluntary arrangement. It's basically a legally binding agreement between the company and its creditors on how to repay debts and restructure the business.
So it's like a more collaborative approach to finding a solution?
Exactly. It's about finding a compromise that works for everyone involved.
Okay. So we've got a whole spectrum of legal options to consider. It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Absolutely. Every case is unique, and that's why getting legal advice tailored to your specific circumstances is so important.
Right. So we've talked a lot about the financial and legal side of things, but what about the impact this can have on your other customers? When one of your clients goes into administration, it can create this ripple effect of uncertainty.
You're absolutely right. This is actually step number 7. Maintaining customer confidence is super important during these times.
So you're saying don't just ignore the elephant in the room. Address it head on.
Exactly. Be open and transparent with your other customers. Explain the situation clearly and concisely, and most importantly, reassure them about the stability of your own business.
So it's about projecting confidence and showing them that you've got things under control.
Exactly. And that's where having a diversified customer base comes in handy.
Right. The article mentioned that as a key strategy. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So diversification is all about spreading your risk. By not having all your eggs in one basket, you're less vulnerable if one of your customers hits a rough patch.
It's like having a backup generator for your business, just in case the power goes out.
I like that analogy. So even if one client goes into administration, you've got others to rely on while you navigate the situation.
Okay, diversification check. The article also talks about tightening up credit policies. That seems like a smart move after going through something like this.
Absolutely. It's step number 8, and it's all about learning from experience and protecting yourself moving forward. You want to take a close look at your current credit procedures. Are you conducting thorough credit checks on new customers? Are you regularly reviewing the creditworthiness of existing clients?
So making sure you're not doing business with companies that are already on shaky ground.
Exactly. You can also implement credit limits, require upfront payments for certain projects, or even utilize credit scoring systems to assess risk more effectively.
So it's not about being distrustful. It's about being proactive in managing risk.
Exactly. It's about protecting your business and ensuring a healthy cash flow.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from immediate steps to take to bigger picture strategies. But I'm really curious about those real-world examples you mentioned earlier. Can you share some stories about how this all plays out in real life?
Of course. So let's picture this. We've got a small business. We'll call them Acme Widgets. And they supply parts to a bigger manufacturing company. Everything's going great until, well, the bigger company gets a snag and enters administration, and they owe Acme Widgets a hefty sum.
Ouch. Talk about a curveball. So now they're not only dealing with the stress of a client going under, but their own cash flow is taking a hit.
Exactly. It's a double whammy for sure. But this is where all that prep work we talked about earlier really pays off. Acme Widgets had wisely diversified their client base. So even though this one client's administration was a setback, it wasn't a fatal blow.
So they had that safety net.
Yeah.
It's like having a diversified investment portfolio, but for your customers. Spreading that risk can make all the difference.
Spot on. Acme Widgets was able to lean on their other clients while they worked things out with the administrator. They kept those communication lines open, reassured everyone that they were still in business, and ultimately they managed to recover a portion of the outstanding debt.
So they weathered the storm and came out on the other side. That's a great example of how proactive steps can make a real difference. Now, are there ever situations where businesses actually benefit from a client's administration?
You know, it's not the most common scenario, but it can happen. Sometimes a customer's administration can create an opening in the market. Like, let's say a competitor goes under, and you're able to step in and fill that void.
So it's about recognizing potential opportunities that might emerge from what initially seems like a negative situation.
Exactly. It's about having that entrepreneurial mindset, being able to adapt, pivot, and maybe even turn a challenge into a strategic advantage.
That's a great perspective. Now, thinking back to our 8 steps, is there one you see businesses tripping up on the most?
Honestly, one of the most common mistakes is failing to register as a creditor. They might think it's not worth the hassle or that they have no chance of getting their money back. So why bother?
But as we discussed, registering gives you a voice in the process, right? It's about having a seat at the table and advocating for your interests.
Exactly. Even if the chances of a full recovery are slim, being part of the process keeps you informed, helps you understand the options, and you might even be able to influence the outcome.
It's a good reminder that knowledge is power, even in a tough situation. Any other common pitfalls to watch out for?
Another one is failing to communicate effectively with other stakeholders, especially your other customers. When rumors are flying around and uncertainty is high, it can be tempting to just bury your head in the sand.
But that can backfire pretty quickly, can't it? Silence can breed fear and speculation.
Absolutely. Transparency and clear communication are essential for maintaining trust. Be upfront about the situation, explain the steps you're taking, and reassure your customers that you value their business and will continue to meet their needs.
Solid advice.
Yeah.
Well, this has been incredibly insightful. We've covered a lot of ground today. From understanding what administration actually means to practical steps to take and even some real-world examples, I feel like we've given our listeners a solid toolkit to navigate this tricky situation.
My pleasure. I hope it's been helpful.
Absolutely. Any final words of wisdom to leave our listeners with?
You know, just remember that you're not alone in this. There are resources available, experts to guide you, and other businesses who've been through similar experiences. Don't hesitate to reach out for support, advice, and information.
So true. And as you mentioned earlier, there might even be opportunities for collaboration and support within your industry or network. That's something to keep in mind. And with that, it's a wrap on another deep dive. A big thanks to our expert for sharing their expertise and to you, our amazing listeners, for tuning in. Remember to subscribe for more insightful deep dives. Until next time, stay curious and keep those businesses thriving.